And hearkening back to the media and its lack of diligence in doing its job by reporting that which is released from Madison Avenue press release agents, on that list of top 12 dirty dozen supplements, one of the ones that they listed was Comfrey. Comfrey, sometimes known as knit bone, bone set, actually a wonderful herb that can be used, and I use it topically regularly when we have sprains and strains and bruises and even stress fractures topically. And, of course, it was pulled off the market many years ago, and yet Consumer Reports claims it's on the market, freely available, everybody can get it. Not even true. Where was the reporter pointing that out? Just as we did last week in pointing out that aconite from China is not available, and I haven't seen it for 20 years on the American market in the health food stores. Of course, when you use Aconitum napellus as a homeopathic medicine, that's a completely different story, non-toxic. And yes, that form is available, but they made no distinction. So who knows what they were writing about, who fed them, and how it got printed, because Consumer Reports typically does a good job at telling you if the car is going to fall apart or if it's good. But they did a horrible job at addressing the supplement issue. So Comfrey, and of course in Latin terms we call it Symphytum. It's also one of the great homeopathic remedies to address bone fractures, to accelerate growth and healing. But again, they got it so far wrong. And in fact, the Comfrey, they pulled off the market. A few people were evidently liver injured. Those were suspect. And of course they used it and abused it and drank gobs of it, of which any sensible herbalist or someone who knows about these things would never do. We talked last week, Michael, about poisons. Potentially anything could be a poison. You can drown in water. You can certainly drink enough water, throw your electrolytes off balance, and die.
Right.
Yet we don't put warning labels on water, do we? So we are not capable as Americans, because we don't own our bodies anymore, of making decisions, rational decisions, based on information freely available. Because the First Amendment, you heard of that one? The freedom of speech seemingly no longer exists, certainly in the commercial realm, where they determine commercial speech as being substandard. It's less than free speech and should be regulated, controlled, and squashed and censored. And rather than censoring the really horrific and horrendous things out there, like quite honestly, an over-the-counter drug like acetaminophen causing thousands of cases of liver damage and liver failure every year, over-the-counter. No censorship of that. In fact, when they had to recall some Tylenol products for kids, another drug company rushed in to bring their acetaminophen to market, lest there be a liver toxic substance deficiency out there in the marketplace. FDA said, sure, fine, no problem. But you want to bring an herb out that can actually do wonders, like we've talked about selenium. And my dear friend Jonathan Ebord, who sued the FDA, beat him for the 7th time just to force the FDA to acknowledge there's freedom of speech, even commercial. At least as if it's substantiated by science, which it is in so many of these cases. And so these so-called herbal medicines, of which doctors are typically not trained, except the ones I deal with are, of course, they go outside of their training to learn how to help heal their patients. But in fact, they actually know, Michael, that doctors aren't supposed to do it for you, aren't supposed to just take your money and do it for you. Not that they take your money anymore. It's third-party payers, and under Obamacare, who knows who's paying? Everybody and nobody at the same time. And at that rate, of course, you have no allegiances as a doctor. If you're not being paid for by your patient, you're going to do whatever the people paying you say to do. And under Obamacare, we know it will be more and more rationing and less real healing or real medicine that responds to the needs of the individual patient, whether they can pay for it or not, because there's no ability for charity hospitals to exist anymore, very limited ability. Certainly under Obamacare, that washes out the religious institutions that invested in hospitals that would care for the poor and the sick, that would allow for the kind of charity that was a mainstay of the American way of life, even in the 20th century to some degree, although, as we talked about as well before, during that century of the Flexner Report of 1910 and beyond, how modern medicine became a monopoly, a pharmaceutical dictatorship. My friend homeopath Dana Ullman calls it a doctatorship. Very funny and very appropriate. But the good docs out there, they don't want Obamacare. They want to be free to help you to help yourself, to teach you how to get well, which is an appropriate role for a doctor, a physician of any kind, in every kind. And, of course, we know the pharmaceutical industrial complex has lobbied its way into perhaps one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful place in our government, where we basically have the bureaucratic oligarchy limiting Americans' ability to freely understand and learn about supplements, herbs, even homeopathy to some degree, whether people believe it or not. That's what you got to deal with in a free society. People are going to do stuff you don't like, as long as they violate nobody's rights, including and especially yours. then they should be free to do so. But once they step that line, cross that line, now they're doing intervention, just like the federal government is. We've talked about foreign interventionism and the excess interventionism, but what about the domestic interventionism? The ownership of your body. Who owns it? Do you? Then why do you have to ask permission? And now on top of that, the federal government's promoting ionizing radiation as a method for terrorism prevention. And then saves the scans. By the way, yes, these scans in the airport, they promised us they would not be saved. You find out that Big Sis Napolitano at Homeland Security says, oh, all those machines are mandated. They have to be able to save them or we can't buy them, right? So all the airport scanners, the federal courthouse scanners, the state, all of this stuff, going to save naked, I call it X-ray pornography, and they want your kids to go through it too. Ionizing radiation, it's bad enough for adults. What about kids with the faster reproducing cells in the growth years? What are they going to do to promote prevention? Oh, I'm sorry. The FDA has fought tooth and nail to limit your knowledge of selenium's role in counteracting oxidative stress and damage from toxins, from radiation, and other things.
Liberals do not want people to empower themselves with natural medicine.
And, of course, the reason why those that did survive, we recently just passed the anniversaries of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the fact that those that did well, and there were studies of these, that did well and didn't get cancer after the radiation exposure were on high doses of seaweed. They ate a lot of seaweed. Imagine sea vegetation had all the minerals and especially a lot of selenium and iodine as well. But these are food sources of nutrients. They're not drugs, so we can't have anybody out there telling the truth because it might eke into the sales coming from that pharmaceutical industrial complex. And you know, Michael, I have argued for freedom. I'm not about banning drugs. If you want them, if the doctor thinks it's necessary, by all means. But how about a free market for healing? Watch the prices drop. Watch the accessibility become enhanced to the level of which even the poorest among us could find a way to afford it, or charity was free to reign again instead of government, which is not charity. It's force and it's fraud. And it violates the basic tenets of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and Bill of Rights, forcing children into ionizing radiation scans. I wonder if Obamacare is going to cover the cost of oncology, especially for those kids. Will Homeland Security require all Americans to glow in the dark for our own protection? That way they'll identify Americans, and that only the terrorists that won't go through it will know them because they're not irradiated. That's how they'll do it. This is the absurdity of big government. Again, dictatorship, obviously not constitutional, although maybe pharmaceutical. If you don't think the government owns your body, then why do you have to ask permission to heal it without using medicines sanctioned by the state?
Thanks for the report, Robert.
Thanks again, Michael, for the opportunity to spread the message of health, freedom, and liberty. You can learn more and link through to many of the stories and interviews that I do at robertscottbell.com. That's robertscottbell.com.
I'll be right back. Savvy.